Hi learners, welcome to our today's session. I want us to look at this particular paper, that is Business Data Analytics, the CPA paper that is post-advanced, which was tested in the month of December 2023. So today we are going to tackle a question that is question number 22. So let's read it together. Safari Limited is evaluating a project with the following details. So we have initial investment, we have residual value or salvage value, we have year one projected cash flows, and of course, we have annual cash flow growth rate from year two, and the life of the project, that is 5 years. What does the examiner want you to do? One, you are required to compute the following project metrics: the payback period, the net present value, assume a discount rate of 12%, and the profitability index, assuming a discount rate of 12%. Then part B, using a graph, determine the project's internal rate of return. So as you can see, this was the simplest question of all, because number one, the examiner has not given you tax rate. The examiner has not given you tax rate. So if tax rate is not given, then we are not going to have something called tax benefit. That is depreciation tax shield. The depreciation tax shield will not be calculated because we've not been given the tax rate. And therefore, if that is not there, we don't have any business with calculating the depreciation. Why are we not going to calculate depreciation? Our interest here is to get the annual net cash flows, and depreciation is an non-cash item. So if you deduct depreciation here, when you want to arrive at the net annual cash flows, you have to add it back. So why should we deduct it and add it back when it has no effect because the tax rate was not given? So we are not going to calculate depreciation here. And therefore, that is what made this question to be the simplest of all since CASNEB started testing students on this practical paper. So I want us to do this together. I want us to do this together by listing the years here. So you're going to have year 0, you're going to have year 2, sorry, year 1, year 2. So let's do it together. Let's do it together all the way to year 5. Then within that, we are going to start with initial investment. Initial investment. So our initial investment, here will be equivalent to the figure that we have been given there. The initial investment is 100 million. And this 100 million, because it is initial cash outflow in period 0, we insert a negative. We insert a negative. So initial investment, do we have anything to do with working capital? It was also not provided. It was also not provided. So those are some of the things that are going to make this question to be the simplest of all. Then let's come to annual. Let's come to annual cash flow in year 1. Let's come to annual. Let's come to annual cash flows. So the annual cash flows here, they are starting to receive the cash flows in year 1. In year 1, and therefore, this is what we have. This is what we have here. This is what we have here. Okay, so this is what we have here. In year 1, we are told that the initial cash flow or the cash flow in the first year of this investment will be 25 million. So that's where we have our 25 million. Why are we not putting a negative? Because it is cash inflow. It is now cash inflow. Good. Then we get to this part here, that is year 2. What are they telling us about year 2? They are telling us here that the annual cash flow growth rate from year 2 will be 10%. That is, this cash flow or the annual cash flows from year 1 or from year 2 will be increasing by 10% of the previous year's cash inflow. So if they tell us that it's going to increase by 10%, the growth rate here is constant. So what are we going to do? You simply come here and say, you take one that is representing 100%. We add to 10%, which we need to fully lock. We close our bracket, then you multiply by the previous year's cash inflow. If that is done, then automatically you'll be able to fill it to year 5 to get the cash inflows. But then if I now come to this other part, it was very simple. Do I have any other thing? The next thing that you're supposed to consider now is the terminal cash flows. Now that we don't have tax rate, there's nothing like depreciation tax shield. So if I get to this question, do I have the terminal cash flows? And the first question is, do we know the components of cash flows or the components of terminal cash flows? One of them is the working capital that is being recovered at the end of the investment. So the working capital could have been maybe in period 0, we spent some working capital, period 1, period 2, but now all that is supposed to be recovered in the last year of the project. That was also not presented. Another component of terminal cash flow is the salvage value. Do we have the residual value or salvage value of this particular project? Yes, we are able to see we are given the residual value of 10 million. So we call it residual value. In some exams, you'll find them calling it salvage value. So salvage value of our project here is supposed to be received in the last year of the project, which is year 5, and we are able to see the figure is 10 million. The figure is 10 million. So having done that, we can now go ahead and get the net cash flows. The net cash flows. The net cash flows. So do we have the way of getting the net cash flows? Yes, you get the summation of everything now. So let's get the summation. Let's get the summation of all these. Let's get the summation of all these. So if we try to do that, this is what you're getting as the summation of the cash inflows, the net cash flows. So that is what we have there. That is what we have there. So what is the question as per the exams here? We were told to compute the following project metrics. The first one is payback period. So payback period is that period when the company is able to recoup back the initial investment amount, the initial outlay amount. So as you can see, for us to be able to recoup back the initial investment amount, we need to determine the cash flow until we arrive at 0, if you are going to use this, or arrive at 100 million. So what are we going to do? The first step that you're going to take is, why can't we transform this? Why can't we transform this? Transform this to vertical order. So let's transform this to vertical order. Let's transform this to vertical order. So I'll just have this one here in this manner. Get to copy it. Then I get to this part. I highlight where I want to place it. Maybe such kind of space. Then I come to this section here and have the option of transpose. So by doing that, I have been able to transform it to vertical arrangement. And here my interest is basically the net cash flows that I need and the year column. So here I'm going to call it year column, and then I only need the net cash flow. So I will do away with these other columns, but because this last column here has got a formula, what do I need to do? I simply come to this part here, copy and paste values. I come and paste values only. for me to be able to get all that I need. For me to be able to get all that I need. So having done that, we now have the net cash flows in period 0 up to period 5. And therefore, the next thing we need to do for us to be able to get payback period. Remember, we are now responding. We are responding to question, Roman A, part A of the question, Roman 1, part A of the question, Roman 1. So here, what we need to do is basically come up with another column called cumulative cash flows. So the cumulative cash flows column here, will give us, we say, get to this is the first one. How do we get the second one? It is the previous period's cumulative figure plus the current net cash flow. So if that is done, we'll be able to autofill it up to the last period, that is year 5. So we need to recover. Remember, initially we invested 100 million. We invested 100 million. So how much do I need to receive, or at what point will I receive back my 100 million? You can see here at this point, I still need 17,250,000 to recover or to put back my 100 million. So what do I need to do? I simply now come to this section. So as you can see, the full years before I recover back my 100 million is 3. Is it? The full years before I recover back my 100 million is 3 years. Then if I move down here, you'll be able to see, for me to get to 0, whereby I'm able to recover this negative 100,000 or negative 100 million here, then I'm still lacking 17,250,000. So the question is, where will I get this 17,250,000 from? 17,250,000. Remember, I've completed year 3, but I'm ending with a cumulative negative of 17,250,000. So what do I need to do? I'll get to the next year, that is year 4, because if I take the whole of year 4, I'll be having an excess of 16,025,000. So it means it is between 3 and 4. My payback period is between year 3 and year 4. That is slightly above year 3 and slightly below year 4. So it is in between year 3 and year 4. So it means for me to get to 0, I need 17,250,000. Where will I get it from? I'm getting it from the net cash flow in year 4. The net cash flow in year 4 is given here as 33,275,000. So it means this 17 is a fraction of this. What is the fraction of this that I'm going to take? What portion of 33,275,000 am I going to take? It is this one here. So if that is expressed as a fraction, what will I have? If that is expressed as a fraction, what will I have? You're able to see I'm having this one here. That is 0.51844. 0.184440. So what do I need to do? The full years is 3 years, and then the proportion there is this one here. So if all that is added, then automatically I'm able to get to the payback period of this particular project. I'm able to get to the payback period of this particular project, which we can all see is equivalent to 3.52 years. 3.52 years. So that is our payback period. That is our payback period. So we've answered Roman 1 of the question. Then they're telling us to come up with the net present value, assuming a discount rate of 12%. That discount rate, so let me just bring these figures down here. So we can decide to bring this. We can decide to have this down here. We can decide to have it down here. Still, I want us to do it in the vertical format or vertical way. So we can decide and bring it down here. 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 So of course these ones we don't need. So which one are we dealing with? Which one are we dealing with? Which one are we dealing with? We are dealing with Roman 2 of the question. We are dealing with Roman 2 of our question here, which I need us again to understand so perfectly. So Roman 2 of the question here, Roman 2 of this particular question. So the annual cash flow is 25. Then of course this one here, we are going to take the 10%, which is supposed to be this. Which is supposed to be that. It is supposed to be that of all those figures for us to be able to get the same thing. As you can see, it is 46, 602, 500. Yes, good. So our formula or our workings are now perfectly presented. So our interest here is basically the net cash flows, here, and we are told that the cost of capital is 12%. Cost of capital is 12%. So we have two ways of doing this, which somebody will apply. Somebody will apply that. Whatever you are doing when you are doing the other papers, you are coming up with the present value interest factor, and then you get the present values, and then you summarize with the summation. We are going to calculate now our net present value using these two formulas. Let's look at it. So the present value here will be equal to 1 plus R. R is this one here. R is now the discounting rate or cost of capital. Then we raise it to power negative this period here. We raise it to power negative. We raise it to power negative that period there. We raise it to power that period there. So this one here is the year. So this one here, I can increase it to 2 or 4 decimal places for us to be able to understand that table. The table that we normally use, to get this present value. So this is what we have. Now, how do we get present value? It is the net cash flow multiplied by the present value interest factor. If that is done, this is what we are going to have. Then, of course, our net present value is the summation now of all this. Our net present value is the summation of all that. So that is what we are getting as the net present value. And you can see it is a positive, so we call this viable. It is viable. Good. Another way now, as an advanced student, we need to get net present value by use of that particular function. So our net present value is net present value. We take the rate, which is this, comma, we take the values, that is value 1. So we start with the value in year 1, the net cash flow in year 1 here, up to year 5, comma, then we are supposed to less initial outlay. But because our initial outlay is already indicated in negative, we just add that. If that is done, you'll be able to see we are arriving at the same answer. So I want to encourage CPA or BDA students to avoid using this long procedure unless you are calculating Macaulay's period. So this one here, I want us to Forget about that and use the shortcut, the NPV function. And of course, having calculated NPV, we say here that the project is viable. So we've been able to see the payback period is 3.52 years, of which they did not give us a benchmark payback period. If they could have given us a benchmark payback period or a maximum investment period of maybe 4 years, then we could have said also the project is viable because its payback period is less than the benchmark. But now our net present value here, when it is used to do still the analysis of this project, you're able to see it is a positive number. So it means we are able to recover back our cash flow and even get this as a profit. So we call this project to be viable. Let's go to the next part of the question. That is Roman 3. The profitability index assuming a discount rate of this one here. So how do we get profitability index? Profitability index here, profitability index. So here we are calculating net present value. So profitability index or PI, profitability index or PI is equivalent to present value, that is summation of present values divided by initial outlay. Summation of present values, then we divide by initial outlay. So are we able to get the summation of the present values? Are we able to get the summation of the present values? Are we able to get the summation of the present values? Yes, we are able to get that. Actually, when we are calculating net present value, the last part we were deducting the initial outlay. So before you deduct the initial outlay, you're basically getting the summation of present value. So let's just have it. Summation of present values. So summation of present values is basically equivalent to NPV. Equivalent to NPV. Our rate is here, comma, the initial outlay or the value 1, that is the figures from year 1. The figures from year 1 is here all the way to year 5. Then you close the bracket. So before, by not including the initial outlay as part of that, we are basically calculating the present value. So this is the summation of the present values. And of course, our initial outlay, we are given 100, we are given 100,000, 100 million. We are given 100 million. We are given 100 million. So this is what we are required to use. These are the two items, the numerator and the denominator. So our profitability index now is basically equivalent to summation of present values, then we divide by initial outlay. So if that is done, you'll be able to see we are getting 1.13337. What does it say? The project is viable because our profitability index is greater than 1. Our profitability index is greater than 1. Our profitability index is greater than 1. Now look at part B of the question. What are they telling us? Using a graph, determine the project's internal rate of return. So the internal rate of return here, the internal rate of return of this project is very, very simple. The internal rate of return of this project, here we are basically required to come up with the cost of capital or the required rate of return at which our net present value is equivalent to 0. We want to get that internal rate of return at which the net present value is equivalent to 0. So what do? We can use two methods. The first one here, look at what you can use. You just come to this part and give us IRR. You can calculate it down here. Let me show you what we can do. Even though that procedure, they have not said, they have not mentioned anything about that procedure. They are so specific. They need a specific procedure. They need a specific procedure. They need a specific procedure. So what we are going to do here, they want us to calculate, now that we have, they want us to come up here with internal rate of return. The internal rate of return has also got a function. IRR is equivalent to the values, including the initial outflow. So we come to this part here and highlight all this. By doing that, close the bracket and enter. Then you'll be able to see, let me increase the number of decimal places. You'll be able to see our internal rate of return is 16.745. 16.745. We can also, so that's the first method. We get it by use of IRR function. Another way, we can use what if analysis. So you get to data, go to what if analysis, and then we use goal seek. So goal seek here, our interest is to set net present value to be equivalent to 0. When we set our net present value to be equivalent to 0 by interfering with the cost of capital. At that point when NPV is equal to 0, then that cost of capital is basically the internal rate of return. So let's try and see if our goal seek will lead us to that. As you can see, it is also giving us 17%. Or let me do it this way. Let me increase the number of decimal places so that we are able to see the effect. So let's go to data, what if analysis, goal seek. We are setting our net present value to be equal to 0 by interfering with the cost of capital. So if that is done, you'll be able to see we are getting 16.747, which is the same as this when you are calculating using the IRR function. So that is our first method. That's our first method, or that's our second method. So let's go to the question and understand the interest of the examiner. The examiner is aware that we have those two methods, but the examiner went ahead and said, using a graph, determine the project's internal rate of return. So we are required to use a graph here. How will we come up with a graph? Coming up with a graph here, so internal rate of return. Coming up with a graph here, we basically need to have a graph of cost of capital and also a graph of net present value. So at that point when net present value will be equal to 0, we are basically going to have our internal rate of return. So first of all, we are going to have a graph. We are going to have a graph of net present value against. We are going to have a graph of net present value against cost of capital. So we have another way, other two ways of doing the same. We'll basically come here and use data table. So I'll come down here and first of all, come here and have the rates here. So let's have maybe cost of capital, and then we have net present value. So that's what we are going to have. So the cost of capital that you are going to have here, the cost of capital, we are going to start with, let's start with the 8% all the way to 24. So 8% of course will take us to, will give us a strong positive net present value. But now we want to get to that point where we are getting a negative. So let's take it maybe to 24. And here we refer to the net present value we are getting up here. So what do we do now? We highlight the whole of this. We highlight the whole of this. We get to data, relative analysis, data table, and of course we have one-way data table. So one-way data table, the item that we are trying to vary here is arranged in one column. So we go to the column input and look at what do we want to vary. We are basically varying the cost of capital, this cost of capital here, then you confirm. So by doing that, we are able to come up with what we call the comparison of these two figures. So we get to all, put the comma style to the nearest whole number, and of course we don't want to make it keep on changing. So we are going to copy and paste values only to eliminate the formulas. So once that is done, you're able to see we have the figures without the formula. So here I will have cost of capital, and then this side I will have net present value. So at that point, when net present value is 0, that's where our internal rate of return is. So if you just look at it before we take it to the graph, you can see at 16 we have a positive figure. At 17 we have a negative figure. So it is between 16 and 17. That's why you're able to see we have 16.747. So can we transfer this to a graph and still have the same thing? Let's see. So I'll go to this part here, go to insert. So just highlight this, go to insert, and we of course we want to insert here a line, insert a line graph, insert a line graph. So we can decide to insert this one here, or even this, but look at this one here, this chart to show the trends over time. So this one I think will serve us better. But now if you look at it, our net present value is the one that should be, our net present value should be in the y-axis. So what do? Just come to this part and switch column. If you switch column, look at what we have. So what do we need to do? We come here and select data. We come here and select data. So our cost of capital here is what we are going to take to this other side. Our cost of capital is what we are going to take to this other side. So another way of doing that to avoid maybe having issues of interchanging these ones here, as you can see, what you need to do is very simple. Come here and switch. Come here and switch this data. Come here and switch this data. How am I going to do this? So once you have these figures here without the formulas, we know very well that the first column of what you've selected will be taken to the y-axis. So I just come and bring it this other side. Just come and bring it the other side, and of course, we now come and get to insert line. So insert here, the line is here. Get to this point and you'll be able to see we have the line. We have the line graph here. So cost of capital is this one here, and then NPV is the one that is highlighted. So this is what we have. So let's just move down and see how our chart looks like. So if you look at this chart, here, you'll be able to see we have the line here of cost of capital. So at that point, when our NPV will be 0, our net present value will be 0. Our net present value will be 0. Where will we have the net present value? Where will we have the net present value here? So look at the cost of capital. This is the line. This is the line. At around this point, you'll be able to see we have a net present value of 0. So where will we have that? Where will we have that? Where will we have that? Down here. down here, you're able to see our net present value is going to be 0 at this point when internal rate of return is at this point here. Let's see. So the value, as you can see, is 17%. But when it touches the 0 sign, it's around this place here. So slightly at 10, it is 17%, but it should be somewhere here. Slightly somewhere there. Somewhere here. Slightly below 17. So of course, you are going to maybe use trial and error at some point, but you are able to see at this point, it is 16. At this point, it is 17. So it is between 16 and 17 here, somewhere here. So at that point, we now know we can compare and say maybe it is around 17 or 16 point something, which we're able to see is equivalent to 16.747. 16.747%. 16.747%. So that is our required rate of that's our internal rate of return. And that internal rate of return is what you are required to do. Basically, the examiner wanted you to arrive at this, but now you have to present it in a graph. You have to present it in a graph. So the first thing that you're supposed to do is to have the graph down or have the figures down here. You interchange them, then you draw the chart. So here, of course, what are you drawing? What are you drawing here? You are drawing a chart. So a line graph showing a line graph showing. So you can just have here, tell us it is a line graph. A line graph showing net present value against net present value against cost of capital. A line graph showing net present value against cost of capital. And of course, you need to give us the axis label here. So give us the axis titles, whereby this one here, we are going to call it NPV in shillings. Then here we are going to call it cost of capital in percentages. Cost of capital in percentages. So that is what we have. That is what we have down there. That is what we have down there. Somebody is also thinking of another thing. So that is it. That is what you are supposed to do in that particular question for you to be able to score to get your 30 marks. Remember, question 22 is a compulsory question. So by doing this simple thing here, you already have your 30 marks for this particular question. So thanks for your time. What we need to understand now is RCM has already prepared for the January intake for business data analytics. So what do we need to have in place? You need to have a laptop that is Core i3 with Excel or MS Office of at least or at most 2023 going forward. So you have 2023 going forward. Then you join our classes. So currently, RCM is giving you this particular course at an offer of 7.5% discount. Remember, the fees for January intake is 9,000. But if you are given this at a discount of 7.5%, then you are required to pay, as at today, you are required to pay. Let's use this because we have Excel with us here. Let's take advantage of that and confirm this discount with you together. So we have that 7.5% of this. If you have a discount of 7.5%, then as at now, you are supposed to pay 8,325. But if you wait for January, you're going to pay 9,000. So why can't you take advantage of this discount? Why can't you take advantage of discount and save? Of course, if you pay right away, you'll be given access to our notes and videos so that you start studying as early as today, such that when you now get to class on in the month of January, you'll be slightly ahead of others. Why can't you take this advantage and join our classes as early as today by paying 8,325? For more information, just click on the link under description and you'll be able to get to our website where you are going to get a lot of information about this particular course. For any inquiry, you can contact our number, that is 0719 525,000 or 0793 555 000. Thanks for your time. Have a blessed time and enjoy your holiday.